I am going to introduce Sean Corrigan now from the National Federation of Group Water Schemes, and he's going to speak to us now about source water protection. So thanks again, Conor, and welcome, Sean.
Thanks, Emer.
Hiya.
Good now, can you hear me?
Yeah, I hear you perfectly. And if you just want to go to full screen, you're on your note screen.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Excellent.
Thanks very much, Emer, for having me along today. I work with the National Federation of Group Water Schemes. I think there are about 20 group water schemes in Sligo itself as well. So for those of you who don't know what a group water scheme is, it's a community-owned, community-managed, I suppose, water utility. They were primarily set up in the 1970s. And I suppose we're the body that liaises with, I suppose, the department to ensure funding goes in the proper places. I'm currently working on a source protection pilot project in County Roscommon. There's also a sister project happening up in County Monaghan. And it's very much a science-based process. We've developed a framework for drinking water source protection. We've dealt with, we've included lots of different stakeholders. And from our framework, we've developed individual source protection plans for each of our group water schemes. And we've developed a handbook as well because of the need from the group water scheme managers and ourselves. We developed a handbook of source protection mitigation measures, and it's primarily farmer based because a lot of the pressures that are happening within our catchments, probably 80% of the pressures are coming from agriculture. So our objective in Roscommon was to implement source protection plans in a series of catchments that roughly covered an area of 200 square kilometres. And instead of just looking at the water courses itself and the water sources, we've taken a catchment-based approach, and we're trying to look at areas that we can influence. So we're trying to look at the farming areas as well, within the catchment as well, and talking to the farmers. So this is an example of one of our catchments here. It's the Mid-Roscommon Group Water Scheme. It supplies roughly 2,500 people in Roscommon with treated drinking water. And you can see there's a blue dot, which is our source. And around that, there's a dotted line, which is roughly 200 square meters. And this is traditionally an area that I suppose group water schemes would have concentrated on protecting the water around that area. But we're now taking a much more wider catchment-based approach. Okay, that's just the original area that would have been looked at down through the years. So for an integrated catchment management approach, it comes down to one-to-one engagement. There are other elements of the project as well, but it's basically down to one-to-one engagement. And what we found here on this particular farm, our manager there is an old Carol. He's in the high-vis jacket, and the farmer that we're dealing with or working with is on the left-hand side with a big stick in his hand. That was for the cattle. It wasn't for Noel, actually. You can see there a drain leading to a water course. And what we found by taking samples across the catchment is there was a lot of agricultural runoff coming from this drain, coming from further upstream and downstream as well. So by engaging with the farmer, what he's agreed to do is he's agreed to put in a fence, which is 1.5 meters out from the edge of the bank. And he's also agreed to put in a 3.5 meter buffer zone of wild meadow flowers. And I suppose the benefit for ourselves is the 3.5 meter the 3.5 meter buffer zone of wildflowers acts as a nutrient trap for ourselves. It'll be cut once a year. But for the farmer himself, I suppose the benefit is he's a beekeeper, and it's a project that I'll talk about as the presentation develops. And the benefit to the farmer will be this will be a food source for his bees. So as the project has developed, it's very much based on science, but we're also trying to develop a framework for engagement. And we've come up with a number of principles, and some you can use, some you can't. You don't have to use all the principles. What we're finding as well is we're trying to replicate this in other areas across the country. So what we found is some of the important principles that we found are bringing together different knowledge types, and communication styles should always focus on the audience. It's important not just to have policymakers, but it's important to have all different groups that are involved in the catchment itself. We have Teagasc, we have Roscommon County Council play a major role in this project. They know the lie of the land down there. We work with the laboratories there. We work with the environmental officers there as well. It's also important to identify key farmers and influencers and start with them. One of the experiences that we had on one of our group water schemes is we started with an influencer, but he wasn't a very good influencer. He was very negative. And what we found by working with him is that he influenced the other farmers negatively, so he had a huge amount of work to do. So it's very important that the people that we start working with, they're very positive people and they influence in a positive way. We give farmers access to scientific data and specific advice. In the past, what was found was, there's a lot of general advice, but farmers want specific advice. What do they need to do themselves on their farm to improve the water quality? Why is it so bad? You're just pointing the finger at me here. Whereas if you can show them scientific data and what actually is happening within their land itself, they're more inclined to believe what we're doing. And we found that's the case as well. We're working with intensive farmers and non-intensive farmers, and we found that if we go to them with scientific advice and show them exactly what's happening on their land, on the water in their land, they're more likely to listen to us. One of the major things that we did was we identified barriers to implementation, and we replaced them barriers with benefits. And that's very important as well. We go out, we're all very interested in protecting the environment and nature-based solutions. But when we go and speak to the farmer, what are the barriers from stopping him getting involved? And he's a lot of other things, and she as well. The families have to feed their own families, they have medical bills to pay, sometimes college bills. So it'd be like someone coming to me in my own garden and say, okay, Sean, you're on a salary here. We want you to give us 5% of your salary to protect the environment. It's not going to happen. And we found that the more engaged the farmer is, the more likely that there'll be environmental spillover as well. So some of the barriers that we found, there was a nice, we set up a little group of 4 farmers in the area, and they found that there was an isolation, there was a blame game, that people from outside their own area, primarily cities, and they actually pointed the finger a lot to Dublin. People up in Dublin were actually blaming the farming community for everything that was happening negatively in rural Ireland. They also felt that there was a knowledge gap, not just amongst themselves, but amongst people like myself going and talking to the farmers as well. We didn't understand all the pressures that farmers were under, but also as well, they acknowledged that the farmers didn't understand how they could protect their water source as well. There were also worries about delays in farm payments and worries about loss in farm payments. A lot of smaller farmers depend on these farm payments, to I suppose, put food on the table for their families. And they were worried that if they implemented measures that we suggested, that they would lose, or there would be delays in their payments. An example is a photograph taken outside one of the farmers' houses. They planted, years ago, they would have planted trees as shelter around their farming homes. But we were talking to them about putting in riparian zones alongside rivers, alongside drains on their farms. And they showed me this area here outside one of their houses, and they told me that they were docked their farm payment because the land was deemed as unproductive. And yet here I am coming in talking to them about putting in such zones as this along their riverbanks as well. So I spoke to the Department of Agriculture, and we got an exemption for the projects that we're working on, that if farmers did put in these zones alongside rivers, they wouldn't be docked their payments. Some of the positives is they wanted to engage, they wanted to get involved, but they also wanted clear direction as well. So we worked with the farming community as a principle of mutual respect. We developed information that we sent out through local media. We work with the intensive farmers as well, and intensive farmers get a very bad rep. But again, the policy for intensive farmers is they're being taught to intensify, and if they don't intensify, they'll lose their payments. We also worked with 2 mental health workshops in Roscommon as well, where the people that have different needs went in and they made bee hotels, which could be distributed to households along the community as well, just to raise awareness of the damage that pesticides can do at a local level. And again, I mentioned earlier on, these farmers, the intensive farmers, they're taught about intensity. They're told to maximize and squeeze every bit of productivity out of their land, which is, I suppose, is in conflict to what we're trying to achieve with environmental policy. I started up beekeeping myself in 2019, and it opened up a different way of thinking to myself. It gave me a much more a wider appreciation of what was happening within the community itself. And we know that farmers like to farm, they like to produce a product. So we came up with a concept called the Let It Be project. And this is one of our managers, like a guy called Thomas Rush. He's on the Corrigan Group water scheme. And what we decided to do in Corrigan was, again, we picked 3 farmers. We felt that they were fairly positive farmers. They were fairly influential amongst their peers across the catchment. And the catchment here is in red outline. And we gave them 2 beehives each. And the beehives are represented there by the yellow dots on the screen. So bees can fly a radius of around 3 miles every day from the hive. And we found that the farmers who got involved in the project, they wanted to provide food for their bees, and they wanted to know what harmed their bees as well. So this was a way for us to raise, I suppose, awareness on pesticides within the catchment itself. And we have our 3 champion farmers then going out talking to other farmers on the danger that pesticides can do, and also creating, I suppose, natural capital by creating buffer zones along rivers, alongside drains of trees and wild meadow flowers. Some of our families here, and as you can see, there's a lot of smiley faces there, and we think this is important, and it's something that we've kind of discovered as we're kind of rolling out the program in different areas, that people who are getting involved are enjoying it, and that's very important. You know, people, if they enjoy something, they're more inclined to stick at it, and because they're very much based at a local level, they're seen as being champions in their local communities as well. And again, what you see smiling faces. And what we've done as well is we've given people who get involved, we've given them a plaque for their farms outside. So it's a sense of pride in their community as well, of what they're doing. And just a quote from John Lennon. I won't read it out, you can probably have a look at it there yourself. But I just think, again, it's something that we kind of overlook at times as engineers and as scientists and people that make policy. You know, people need to enjoy what they're doing. And if they enjoy what they're doing, if they can find a love of nature, we feel that they'll be more inclined to stick to what they're doing. Our project was recognised by the European Parliament there last December, where it won the European Bee Award for the change of land management practices. And we're hoping that by, I suppose, championing the bee, because bees are so visible in rural communities, that people can kind of get a grasp of what we're trying to achieve. 2 more principles that we kind of came up with ourselves through I suppose research is adults receive most of their environmental education through the media, you know, which can be a bad thing. We've all seen, I suppose, how biased social media can be, depending on what your likes are and what your needs are. So I developed an education program to raise awareness, with the hope that people can bring this home to, our children can bring this home to their families. The program is called "I Planted a Tree and My Garden is Pesticide Free," where we got 88 out of 91 schools involved in County Roscommon. A local businessman called Sean Ryan sponsored all of the trees, and we developed literature that was rolled out to homes across the county to give people information on what they can do in their gardens to, I suppose, promote biodiversity. And this had a dual benefit as well of taking the isolation away from the farming community as well. As I said earlier on, you know, we felt that the farmers felt that they were being isolated. So by doing this, we were kind of sending a message out to the farmers as well, that everyone had a role to play. Some of the results, we did a survey as well. Some of the final results of our attitude and behavioural survey with this is that nearly 70% of people across the county use pesticides. And, you know, by giving them choices, by giving them different reasons to change their behaviour, we found that people, you know, would change their behaviour, but they had to be shown how and why. One interesting result that we did get was we wanted to find out how people receive their information on the local level. And Facebook was the most common way that people received their information. So it's a channel that we're going to use to share information as the project develops. As the engagement started, the uncertainty with the farmers was at its lowest, and the trust developed as the certainty rose. So what we found was, you know, it took multiple visits to get people involved. You can't just go along and get everything done in the first visit. You know, developing that trust was key to what we were trying to achieve. Again, it wasn't just about happy faces. You know, we have these areas here now that are leading to our water source. And by getting 1 or 2 farmers involved, they spoke to their neighbours and they got the other people involved. So the first farmer we got involved, we gave him a beehive, and he put up a post on Facebook. He got the other 2 people interested. They went out and spoke to their neighbours. So we're trying to grow this organically, but we're also trying to grow it in the areas that we want to grow it as well. You know, like I said, it's very much a science-based project, but you know, we need it to grow organically on the ground as well. what we're doing with the farmers, we're preparing bespoke biodiversity plans with a focus on source protection. So this particular farmer here, he planted 4,500 hedgerows. He put in 1,000 square meters of wild meadow as well. And he planted about, I think, 500 trees as well to try and protect the watercourses here. So the benefits for us were protecting the watercourses. The benefit for the farmer was it brought him back to nature, and he provided a food source for his bees. So again, multiple benefits, but with the same outcomes. We found that some of the motivators for getting people involved were protecting the local water source, finding a habitat for food for their bees, improving biodiversity, and helping the local community. And some people as well mentioned climate action. So again, different motivators, but the same outcome. The results aren't conclusive yet, but in 2019, we took 43 samples for a number of locations in one of the schemes and found level 8 detections of pesticides. In 2020, we took a similar number of samples and no detection of pesticides were detected. So again, they're not conclusive, but they're positive. And again, this is about using nature-based solutions to get people involved and get people, I suppose, engaged with the community. We've gone out, we've put up signs in Marts. We held a 1-hour radio show as well with Shannonside, which we found very beneficial, very engaging. It educated the presenters as well and gave them, I suppose, an insight to what we were trying to achieve, so they were better placed to ask the right questions if other problems came up in our local area. We've water stations across the county as well. And again, we're dealing with and working with local media. You don't have to start big. What we found is by starting small, it can lead to bigger outcomes. Peer-to-peer training, farm open days are a good way of knowledge transfer. Again, we can't do this with COVID, but we know that farmers are out there talking to each other. And again, knowledge in farming efforts is a way to get them involved and to get them motivated. So that's it. Thanks for listening. Appreciate your time.
Thanks a million, Sean. That was fantastic, and really great seeing the engagement with the farmers and then the general community engagement to get things going, and how important it is to have at the community level everyone on board. So that was really good.